Thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. Today for our ACEs Quarterly, we have Teresa Quinn. She is an emergency management specialist here at the Snohomish Health District and has worked in preparedness and response for the last 15 years with the Snohomish Health District. Prior to that, Teresa worked as the Dignity and Diversity Program Director for the Interfaith Association of Northwest Washington and has worked closely with the Communities of Color Coalition. Teresa developed a curriculum on cultural competence for the Medical Reserve Corps volunteers when she could not find a training that was specific to response workers. Since then, she has presented at the national level on the importance of cultural competence for emergency response workers. Teresa has also modified the training for law enforcement and other career groups. So thank you, Teresa, for being here, and we're excited to hear your webinar.
Great. Thank you so much for inviting me. I just want to give you a few little notes about this training. As you mentioned, we originally had developed this for the Medical Reserve Corps volunteers, and it grew from a 1 to 2 hour training to about a 4-hour training. And it was meant to be delivered with 2 trainers and in actual person in a room with other people, which we don't do for a while anyway. And as you know, the dynamic between a Zoom meeting and being in a room full of people is quite a bit different. So one of the reasons we want to have 2 trainers for this is to have two people from different perspectives. So for instance, if I was training with another person, it might be a man who is a person of color or somebody, so that we have different perspectives giving this information. It's heard differently by different people, and being able to have it being delivered from different people really makes a difference. But today you have me, and that's what we have today. What I'd like to suggest, if you're comfortable with this, if you'd like to turn on your cameras. If you don't want to, that's fine too, but I can then see your face a little bit sometimes, but not all the time because of the nature of Zoom. Because as you know, in a regular training, I would be looking at you and trying to figure out if you like what I'm saying or wanted more information from what I see on your face. But since I'm not going to be able to see all of you, I would really like to ask you to be as involved in this as possible. And looks like we have 42 people on here, which is actually a really good number to give this class to. So what we could do is at the end of each slide, we will take questions if there are any. You can either put them in the chat or you can raise your hand, and hopefully between us, we will be able to see that. You know how Zoom is, it's not perfect, but I'm really hoping that you will have conversation on this, because that's where we have the most learning, rather than just me telling you stuff. And I understand if you are not able to turn on your camera for whatever reason, I totally get it. Sometimes I don't like to turn on my camera at all. But anyway, so we're going to get started. Are there any questions before we go to the next slide? Okay, let's go to the next slide. And I wanted to include this so that we can acknowledge that we are on the traditional land of the Coast Salish, Snohomish, and Tulalip tribes, and to thank them for the opportunity to learn in this place. And I like to include this. I've given the training in different parts of the country, but all of the land in this country belong to someone else. So I really want to acknowledge that as we move forward into this. Okay, can we go to the next slide and we'll talk a little bit about what we hope to get through in this hour. So these are some of the objectives. I want to talk about what culture is, and how, how we can be aware of our own, to understand the importance of cultural competence in the work that we are doing. I mean, why is this important? I've heard this a lot of times that, well, I'm just going to do my work and the cultural competence really isn't going to matter. But what I have learned is that just about any time that you are working with humans, cultural competence is going to make a difference. We're going to talk a lot about unconscious or implicit bias and how that can impact the way that you communicate with people and the way that people communicate with you. And also hopefully to identify some ways to learn more about other cultures. I just want to mention real quickly that this is a 101 kind of training. This is a very beginner kind of training. You may have taken several other trainings before, and I could even ask, have most of you taken several trainings on this topic before? Is this the first one that you've taken? So that's going to impact, you might like, I already know all this stuff already. Well, I hope that we can bring up something new. And that also is another reason why it's really important for people to, engage and be part of this. Like I said, I can talk to you about what I know, but everybody else in this training also has lots and lots of information to share and give us new perspectives on this topic. Any questions on this slide? Okay, let's go to the next slide. So this is the ouch technique. I don't know if any of you have heard about the ouch technique, but there's also some other ground rules that we could have. And I'm not sure how much we will be talking with each other today. I really hope that we can have more of a discussion. But we are going to be talking about things that a lot of times people don't talk about. We're going to be talking about racism and sexism and discrimination and things that are kind of not that much fun and can be very, very uncomfortable. And when I've given this training before, I've asked people, are you uncomfortable talking about these topics? And a lot of times people are, or they're even uncomfortable answering that question. And I can understand that, but I want to frame this conversation in a way so that we can really discuss things. I don't want anyone to feel guilty. I want people to learn about how the things that people are saying when we are saying them. And this is where the ouch technique comes in. Lots of times we may go through life and we may say something, or you may be on the other side of it. You may have a person say something to you that is offensive. And you are in a situation where you cannot really tell that person, wow, that was really offensive, because it's not safe. They may be in a, have authority over you for whatever reason. You may not have that opportunity to tell the person that what they're saying is insulting. And the person who's saying it may or may not, they may not even know that it is insulting. So they're going to keep on going down the road, saying that thing that was insulting to people, and having absolutely no clue that it was, because no one ever can tell them that. So what we want to do in this training is to give everyone the permission to say, ouch, if something that I say or someone else says really didn't feel very good. And then we have that opportunity to explain, if you're comfortable with it, why that didn't feel good. And we will all learn from it. So if I'm saying something that is offensive, then I will learn, whoa, I should not say that, because that was that wasn't appropriate. And I may never have known that before. So how do you feel about using this technique? Also, any other types of ground rules that you would like to apply? Anything that anyone would like to share? Does this sound like absolutely the worst idea in the world, or do you think we can go with this?
I think it sounds great. Hi, I'm Cassidy. I'm sorry, my video's off. I think it sounds great. And thank you so much for making it an open forum where we can feel free to have a conversation about it. I love it.
Great. Thank you, Cassidy. Okay, well, anybody else have anything? I see some of the things coming up in the chat. I'm very happy that everyone agrees with this. Some other ground rules that we could talk about are to assume positive intent. Does anyone else have any ground rules that they would like to have in this conversation? Okay.
Maybe some confidentiality.
Confidentiality. Well, to a certain extent, we are recording it, but
True. Yeah.
but as much as we can, it's not going to be a gotcha kind of time. I statements, that's a great one when talking about what our own experience is rather than assuming everyone else has the same one. Is that kind of what you meant by I statements? Great, thank you. Okay, another thing I will tell you also, I am really hoping that we can have a conversation. I totally understand that this kind of a venue does not exactly promote conversations, but so if we have time, there's a couple of videos that we will show along the way. But if we're having this really great conversation, what we'll do is we'll send you the links for the videos. You may have already seen them. But a lot of times those videos are meant to spark more conversation. So we'll just see how far we are as we get into this. Okay, so we're going to go to the next slide and talk about culture. Now, a lot of times people do not have a complete understanding of what culture is. Does anybody have any ideas of what they think that culture is? So when we're in this today, what we're going to be talking about are all of the things on this slide. A lot of times we think of culture and ethnicity being very much, that kind of the same kind of thing. And while ethnicity and culture can be the same, there's a whole lot of other things besides that. There's gender, there's your profession, shared understanding and experiences. Thank you, Samantha. Marital status, how old you are, all of these different things that are on here. What they do is create a lens through how you see things, ways we live with food and clothing. Yes, there's the actual definition talks about the invisible and the visible. And the visible are some of the things in the pictures here that we see, the way that people dress, their religions, the things that they believe in, codes, manners, language, religion. But all of these things build the lens through how we see other people. At the same time, the cultures of other people build the lens of how they see us and how they hear us as well. And it's not just one culture, because we're not like two-dimensional people. I would just say for my own self, and we can kind of go to the next slide while we talk about this one. For my own self, I belong to several different cultures. I am female. I'm a mom. I'm older. I have lived in the city. I am in the Northwest. I mean, there's lots of different kinds of cultures. I was a Catholic. All of those things build up that lens through how I see different things. This is an exercise that if we were sitting in a classroom, I would have you do, but it's definitely, you can make a poem out of it, but what this is all about is to kind of do a self-exploration of what your culture is. So many years ago, seems like many years ago anyway, Here in Snohomish County, we had some incidents that happened back in 2002, it was a long time ago. And we started a thing called Study Circles on Race. I don't know if any of you were part of that back then, but it was a facilitated conversations with people all over the county. And we had curriculum from the Study Circles group, and it was about racism, because that was the issue that was happening here in Snohomish County. I don't know if you remember, but there was a cross burned on a Black pastor's lawn. There were some people who dressed up in Nazi uniforms and marched down the street in Everett. I don't know if any of you recall those things, but kind of hard to forget them if you were here. And that's one of the reasons that they put together these study circles on race, to get people having a conversation on race. Anyway, at the beginning of this, oh yay, somebody else remembers it. So what the curriculum had us do in that first meeting was to have people talk about what their culture was. And I was able to facilitate several of these study circles. And I had the exact same experience in every single one of these first meetings. Was when we'd be sitting around the table and we would ask people, tell us about your culture. And people who look like me said, I don't have any culture. And so we had to go back and say, yes, you do have a culture. Everybody has a culture. And I think that lots of times, if we are talking to people and asking them to understand someone's culture, and we don't even know that we have our own culture, we need to, take a step back, have an understanding of where we come from, and then we can work more on looking at the cultures of all the other people in our community. So if you have time, you can do this exercise. But I think that we should probably move on to the next slide, because I don't want to run out of time. There's a lot of things to say. So what is cultural competence? It's like other core competencies, and it is more of a journey than an objective. And that's the reason I don't particularly like the words cultural competence, because it insinuates that you're going to get to a place where you got it, you're all done with this, check the box, and we're done. But this is not that kind of a competency where you learn something and then you're done with it. This is something that is ongoing, hopefully throughout our lives. And it's all about valuing and respecting the individual, and it will change the way that you think about things, your attitudes, and hopefully you have more self-reflection on your own self as we try to learn more about everyone else in the community. So before we go any further, are there any questions on this that or challenges or anything like that? Okay. So let's go on. Well, the next slide is, again, this would be a conversation that we would have. But what I've done in this training was to divide it into knowledge, awareness, and skills. And we have talked a little bit about the awareness, and now we're going to go in and talk a little bit more about knowledge. And we're going to talk about the different levels of cultural competence, like we had hinted at, microaggressions, and implicit bias, which I think is kind of the basis of a lot of negative stuff. Okay, can we go to the next slide? So we talked earlier before about how culture is a lens through how we see things, and also how people that we are encountering, they also have this lens of how they can see us. And it is important to understand some of the building blocks of culture, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, but to try to it can be very, very challenging when both people have on essentially different shades of glasses. So they are seeing each other, thinking that they're seeing each other, but not really seeing who they are. And that's what culture sometimes can create. And if we can get past that to be able to communicate with people and to understand more about what they're actually saying, and saying things in a way that people can understand what we're trying to tell them. Does that make sense? Hopefully everyone's nodding their head yes. So if you oh yeah, okay. So if you don't think so, please let me know and I will try to explain that in a little bit better way. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit in the next few slides about some of the building blocks of culture. If you'd like to go on to the next slide. And if we were in a room, we would have a lot of fun with these next few slides because we would be standing up and moving around and demonstrating how this works. So with these building blocks, these are not binary. It's not like individualist or collectivist. It's a spectrum. And on one end is individualist and the other end is collectivist. And there's individuals as well inside of the spectrum. So what we're gonna talk about is what this means. And this little graphic, I love this graphic because I think it really shows the difference between the individualist and the collectivist. So at the top, all of the little fish, they're individualist. They're all about, you know, I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to get away from this big old fish and I don't know. And then in the bottom one, the collectivist, all the little fish have become collectivists and realize that they don't have to be afraid of the big fish because now they collectively are the big fish. So it's kind of a silly little graphic, but it kind of gets the idea across. So of course, no one group is all one way or the other. But if we were in a classroom, what we would do is we would have one end of the classroom be individualist, you know, like if we were drawing a line, and the other end would be collectivist. And then we would ask people to line up based on their own selves, where they think that they individually would fall on that line. And then we can also ask people to identify where they think that their community is, or where the organization that they work for is. And sometimes people move around a lot to show how, you know, they're obviously belonging to different cultures because of that's how these different entities work. So anybody want to talk a little bit about where they think they might lie on the individualist collectivist line? I know when we've done these before, a lot of people end up kind of in the middle, but when you ask them about their organization or the nation or their community, a lot of times they move towards the ends depending on them, which is kind of an interesting observation about how we look at things. So this is one way that this is like a building block of culture. Before we go on, are there any questions? Let's go to the next building block, which is responsibility and logic. So there's universalist and particularist. So a universalist believes that rules are set for everyone. It doesn't matter who you are. Every single person must follow the law the same way. There's no exceptions. That's just the way it is. A particularist will say, sometimes the rules don't apply to some people based on different kinds of things. So again, where do you think you might fall on this line? And where do you think that our community and our nation may fall on this line. Any observations? Okay. Well, I wish we were in a classroom so we could get up and move around, and it would be kind of fun to see that. So let's go to the next slide for the concept of time. So on one end of the spectrum is monochronic, and on the other end is polychronic. Monochronic believes that when we start a meeting, we will start it on time, we will end it on time. And everybody better be there on time, and that's just the way it is, because time is the most important thing of all. And polychronic recognizes that maybe there's some other things that are more important than being on time. And universalists in particular, yes, that is a good thought. Thank you, Jean, I'm sorry, I put my glasses on. So monochronic and polychronic are these two different ways that we look at time, which is kind of a odd concept when you think about it, because sometimes time is, I mean, even the idea of being at a certain place at a certain time is a sort of new kind of concept. I mean, when we're looking at the whole of history. So are there any observations that you have on cultures that you belong to, or that you have observed about monochronic and polychronic?
So this is Cassidy again. I was thinking that about the numbers, like how many people are monochronic, polychronic, and then I came to, I don't want to call it a conclusion, that it's probably half and half. Like at our work culture, I'm very polychronic, which can cause its own problems, but my boss is monochronic. So we're always on schedule with a little leeway. It's a good mix.
Yeah, thank you, Cassidy. Yeah, and like I said, no, it's going to be really hard to be like all the way one or the other way. A lot of us are in the middle on this as well. Any other observations? In my culture, if we say they get their starts at 5, we really, that's true. That's true. Okay, let's go to the next slide, which is the locus of control. So this one is, it's kind of interesting because it's the people that believe that no matter what happens, it's in my control, and I'm the one who controls it. That's your internal locus of control. Your external locus of control is, what was that saying? God willing and the creek don't rise. You know, if it's meant to happen, it will happen. And I know I'm going to mispronounce this, but Inshallah, God willing, essentially. A lot of cultures have that in there. So if you're doing like emergency response, you might even hear someone say, I really shouldn't, there's really no reason for me to learn about preparedness, because if God wants me to survive the flood or the earthquake or whatever it is, then I will. If I'm supposed to die, then I will. So I don't want to get in the way of God. And I mean, those are the different kinds of things that create the way that people have their own traditions and their own ways of dealing with things. And so sometimes when we working in human services and all the different organizations that you work in are trying to get a point across, these foundations of culture may be different from the ones that you're working on. So just having an awareness of what they are so that you can understand where people are coming from and meet them where they are. That's really kind of the basis of what cultural competence is to meet people where they are. Yes. Did you have a question, Cassidy? Oh. You're on.
Thank you. You think I would have it down by this point in pandemic? So with this locus of control, I'm really interested in how your culture impacts locus of control. Like I'm picturing it in a work culture and environment. Sorry, I'm thinking out loud. Because, yeah, so I'm having a hard time relating it to other cultures. If there's people in the meeting who want to share their experience, I would really appreciate it. I'm just having a hard time making the connection.
Okay. Would anyone like to talk about where you believe your locus of control is? Is it more internal or more external? I wish we had one of those little things that we could like take a poll or something like that.
Yes, that'd be great.
So you were all really good in the chat to answer. How many of you would say that you were closer to an internal locus of control? If you want to just put yes in there, we can see that.
I have a little observation I'll share while they're putting that in there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I hope I don't get in trouble for this, but I noticed I work at WorkSource, and I noticed that we have a lot of veterans that work there, and I noticed that that's more of an external. They're used to being told what to do from the outside, whereas I come from more of a different background, more of an education background, and so I'm more internal locus of control. It's different. It's just kind of a different approach to work. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. That was a good observation. It looked like there was a lot of people who responded in the chat about internal. How many people are more an external locus of control? So it looks like most of us are internal. Yes, yeah, absolutely. I didn't do that, really. I agree with you completely. But again, they're not absolutes. Everybody's on a spectrum between the two ends of all of these. And it's something to just give you an idea of when you are working with a particular person or a particular community and you do not understand perhaps why don't they understand what I'm saying, or why are they telling me this other thing? These are some things you might want to look at to help give you a clue of perhaps where they're coming from. So it's just some little helper things. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. And what cultural competency is not. So we talked a little bit about what it is, what it's not. So I'll be totally honest with you. I can't teach you cultural competence. I can give you a bunch of information about it, but it's something that you have to teach your own self. This is an internal thing. It's not math. It's not grammar. These are things that we learn inside of ourselves. Now, for my own self, I know that I am continuing to learn, and hopefully in 5 or 10 years, I will have much more information and be more knowledgeable on this topic than I am now. I know that I know more now than I did before, and every single day is an opportunity to learn more about other cultures and to be able to interact better within different cultures. So it is an internal discovery, and you can learn as much as you want to, or as little as you don't want to, because it is a difficult thing to do. I'm just trying to, one of the things, we talked a little bit about cultural competence as being an odd kind of term because it has that insinuation. So there are some different levels. There's different ways of talking about it, but I like this one where they talk about these 4 different levels of cultural competence. And there's unconscious incompetence. And this is when a person really has no idea about other cultures. All they know is, what they like and what they were raised with, and all of that. That's their whole world. And it is if you are in a dominant culture, it's a really comfortable place to be. It's because you know, if someone doesn't understand you, it's not your problem, it's their problem. That's that in that particular place, that's where that is. But a lot of people aren't going to understand you. You're not going to be able to communicate with a lot of people. And so the next level is conscious incompetence. And this is a very, very uncomfortable place to be. This is when you are aware that you do not know very much about the different cultures around you. And it's so uncomfortable, particularly for people in the dominant culture, that lots of times they don't stay there. They, instead of trying to learn more about other cultures, it's a whole lot easier to going back to be unconscious incompetence. However, again, that's not going to help. So it's better to go to being consciously competent. And what that means is that we understand that there are many different cultures that we will encounter. And we don't know everything about all of them, but we are going to be working on it. And I believe, let's put it this way, I've never met anyone that is unconsciously competent, where they can walk into a room that they've never been into with people they've never seen before and know everything about their culture. I know I wouldn't be able to do that, but, and I haven't met anyone, but it could be possible. So that third one is really where I am right now. I try really hard to stay in that place. It's difficult, but for me, it's very important because I do want to be able to communicate with people and learn more about what they have as well. Any questions or comments before we go to the next slide?
I got something to say.
Yes.
I think being Native American, you know, I grew up on a reservation, and to step out of that, you know, I used to travel a lot and do tours, and you know, a lot of the questions were, you know, do you still live in teepees, or, you know, stuff like that, you know, and that's part of the stereotype, you know, that people haven't been taught, you know, and to be aware of, and I don't take it, you know, to where, you know, it's just the way it is now, you know, to teach them. It's a teaching opportunity for people, you know, and I'm working with homeless clients, and you don't know their story until you ask, you know, where they've been, where they want to go, you know, and that's why I wanted to be a part of this, just to learn and have a conversation about that, you know. That's
Thank you,
all.
Patrick.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your comments. I would really like to have 4 hours in the classroom. I would really like to continue this conversation. So it looks like right now, what time is it? Oh my goodness, we're running out of time. How could that have happened? So let's go to the next slide, and we're going to talk a little bit about microaggressions. I will send you the video that we would show you now, because I don't want to take up all the time on microaggressions, which is on the next slide. But what microaggressions are those small things. They seem small, but they are micro, it's small, but they are still aggressions, and they may be intentional or they may be unintentional. So the next slide gives you a little bit more information on that one. So no, the next one, there you go. Brief and commonplace daily verbal, behavioral, and environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional. And they cause insult. And here are some different examples of some microaggressions. I'm sure that you may have other examples as well. I've heard all of these, and more, which are even wince causing, shall we say. And the video that I would show now is definitely wince causing for sure. So we will send you the links to that video and also to another one. But I want to get on to the next slide, which kind of gets into why does this whole thing start? So I'm part of an organization. Oh, yes, I know. That's another area, absolutely, and people with disabilities that oftentimes are people, hopefully unintentionally, say or do things that cause people, they're insulting. Anyway, I want to talk about unconscious bias, implicit bias, unconscious biases. These are biases that have been taught to us since the time we were born. And it's really hard to overcome them. And I'm going to quickly give you, so the next slide gives you, the next few slides are going to give you some information. So the little cylinder that's there, if, as you can see, as one person can see, it looks like a square, and another, from another viewpoint, it looks like a circle, but in actuality, it's neither one of those things. Excuse me, the next slide shows another one that's really interesting. This picture, you know, they show this picture in this part of the world that we live in right now. And what people said was that, you know, they asked me, what do you see? And they said, well, it's a family, and they're sitting in a room, and there's a window with a tree outside. And so they showed the same picture to a family, a community in Africa, and they saw something very different. It's a family that's sitting outside underneath of a tree, and one of the women has a box on her head that she was carrying. So, I mean, it's all what you are familiar with, is how you see things. So let's go on to the next slide, where we can see a little bit more of how bias can get in the way and actually cause danger. I mean, there's a story, and I'm hoping that I have enough time to tell this story, but this was of a police officer in Las Vegas when there was a shooting incident at a Walmart. And as he was, this was on NPR, you may have heard the story before, but as he was driving to the incident, he was thinking about who the person might be that had the gun and was shooting people. And he had these different, based on past experiences, you know, first of all, he thought it was a black male, and no, it was a Hispanic male. And then when he got to the store, he was like, okay, this is a white male. This is who I'm looking for. And when he got inside the store, there was a woman, there was all kinds of people trying to get out of the store. And this one woman, something stopped him, but he almost was going to help her get out of the store. She was one of the shooters. So his bias was getting in the way of safety. And that's what can happen. So, but wait, there's more. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit more about how implicit bias is like the foundation for a lot of other things that are built on top of it that have created a lot of harm in our community. So that unconscious bias, a lot of times we have absolutely no idea that we even have this bias. So then we have that level of discrimination where, or prejudice. I mean, the prejudice starts first, where we are prejudging people based on our own biases, which we may not even be aware of. If we have power, we can then discriminate and leave people out from opportunities. And that's what builds the different kinds of isms like racism and sexism and those different things that exclude people and also persecute people. So if we can go back to really looking at what our unconscious biases are, and when we look at something and we make a judgment, just thinking about, okay, why did I make that judgment? And thinking about it, is it, was it because of this? Was it because of this particular bias? Now you're thinking, how do I know what I'm biased about? Well, there's this really cool project called the Implicit Bias Project. Have any of you gone to the website to take their tests? How, you want to put in the chat if anyone has taken those implicit bias tests? Yes, yay, yay. Okay, so if you just Google implicit bias test, it will come up. I think it's a Harvard project. It's ongoing. They'll ask you a lot of demographic information. And there is multiple tests to choose from to see if you have a bias for or against different kinds of people. And sometimes it's about people of different races and ethnicities. It might be people from different political parties. It might be people of different body types. I mean, there's all kinds of things that we can have biases about. But the idea behind it is, if we are not aware that we have a bias, we can't really do anything about it. So this gives us some information that says, you might have a bias against people with red hair. So the next time that you are, talking to somebody that has red hair and you're like not agreeing with anything that they're saying, you might want to think, maybe it's because they have red hair. So it just gives you some more information in order to build on your cultural competence. So here are some other things that we have that will help you. Have you all heard of People First Language? Has anyone heard of People First Language? Oh, okay. Oh, good, Jeannie. Yes, there's some people that have heard from it. Okay, so all People First Languages, it's really saying the word people before we talk about the different kinds of things about people. So, like, let's take me, for instance. I'm older. So instead of saying the elderly, which I don't know why I don't like that word, but anyway, you can say people who are older, because I know to me that feels better, because what it says is that I'm a person first rather than an old person. But if you talk about people who have disabilities, saying it in that way rather than the disabled, or when you're talking about people who are homeless, but it's a way of showing respect and talking about people first. Cassidy, you have a question?
Just a side note, in the disabled community, we actually use the word disabled.
Pardon?
So it's a pretty common, we actually use the word disabled. So we're trying to destigmatize it. So we do have a disability. And then were you going to talk about identity first language at all?
Identity first language. No, I don't know. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I only work with people in the disability community, but it's pretty common that people are taking their disability as part of who they are and taking ownership. So although some people prefer like, hi, I'm Patricia, I have a visual disability, a lot of people take that culture part and put it first. So I'm blind and I'm Patricia. So it's all about ownership and preference, obviously, but I definitely defer to that person first language till I ask.
Thank you very much for bringing that up, Cassidy. And I'm so glad that you brought it up, because it really comes down to what people want. And it reminds me of when people say, well, what should I call Black people? Should I call them Black people, or should I call them African Americans, or should I call them people of color? And I'm like, what they want to be called, what each person wants to be called is really the most important. If I tell you, I can't tell you what someone else wants to be called. And I think that comes down to it, although that there's all kinds of things that will tell you one or another, and just like People First Language, it comes down to what individuals want. And it's really important to listen to them and not to feel like, to try not to feel uncomfortable when people do challenge you and ask you to treat them or talk to them in a different manner, because this is about, if we are trying to reach people where they are, then we need to be comfortable with where they are. Does that make sense? Yes, the golden rule and the platinum rule. So does anyone know about the golden rule and the platinum rule? The golden rule is treat everybody the way you want to be treated. And the platinum rule is treat everybody the way that they want to be treated, because it may be a little bit different. Avoiding stereotypes. I know that we are getting close to the end here, so I will try to talk faster. Can we go to the next slide? And the next slide after that, we talked about that one. Narratives and biases. There's really good, if you haven't had a chance to look at Peggy McIntosh's backpack, that is really, really great information. It talks about the different privileges that we have. And just to note in this conversation, sometimes people get uncomfortable when we talk about privilege, and that's not the reason that we're talking about privilege. It's not to make people feel uncomfortable, but it is important that we understand that what we think that, the things that I have doesn't mean everybody has them. That means that I have a privilege. And from my perspective, the way I look at the privileges that I have is that I should take those privileges and help people that don't have the same privileges. I mean, I think that that's in a lot of ways kind of a moral kind of value, but not to feel guilty that I have the privileges, because that's the guilt is not, that's not going to do anything. I've never gained any insight by feeling guilty, but by being able to share and understand the privileges that I hold. Does anybody want to talk about that a little bit? I know we're towards the end of this, but I think this is an important concept. Okay, can we go on to the next slide? I would show another video here, but we'll send you the link for it. But this, again, it shows you how we all may be going the same distance, but we are not all equipped with the same opportunities. And in this little one, it says, I don't see what's the matter. It's the same distance, but of course, it's not really the same path. And that's how a lot of things are, unfortunately, in our culture, as well as in cultures around the world, that there is some communities have more opportunities than others. And the ways that we can level the playing field so that we aren't taking things away from people, but making sure that everyone has the same opportunities so that they can achieve the same things. It's going to make all of us and our whole nation, our whole community, more prosperous and more peaceful. I read something a while ago. It was, and I'm sure that all of you already know this, but they have found that in nations where women have equal rights, that their economies are stronger, they are more peaceful, there's fewer wars that they get into. I'm not saying that they're perfect, but where women have more equal rights, these other kinds of things come into place. Now that women, it's just one piece of it. So it's something to think about, how when we make a more level playing field, we create more opportunities for everyone. Okay, so let's go. We are, my goodness sakes, how much time do we have left? 1 minute. We would go in and talk a little bit about the ways that people communicate with each other. And these are just some different things that different symbols and things that people would do that in this culture that we are in may mean one thing, and in another culture means something completely different that we had absolutely no intention of communicating. So let's see here. And then the next slide just talks about how racism has been used to divide people in not just in our country, but in other countries. And it is just a social construct. It is not, we're all part of the same race, right? But race and ethnicity have been utilized to divide people. And that division hurts all of us. And the more that we can look at some of the things that have created these different layers of racism and really address them and integrate them into our life so that we are always looking at the different kinds of things that we encounter to see if racism has been embedded in them, because sometimes that's what happens. The training was scheduled to go until 4:30. So, well, we'll just keep on going then. I thought that we had some time that we needed to do questions and answers, but we're kind of integrating that into all of this. So maybe we can even show the videos because they're kind of fun. So this is where I was talking before about how the basis of racism and sexism initially comes from the unconscious implicit bias, and prejudice is built on top of that. And then when power is added in, that it comes out as discrimination. Oh, that's the next slide. I'm sorry, I'm switching it here. And so one of the things that happens with racism and sexism and these other types of things is that it can actually cause PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And it can also cause generational trauma. And so they have found that, well, there was a story on PBS called Unnatural Causes. This is quite a few years ago. But if any of you had a chance to watch it, one of the segments was on low birth weight babies in the African-American community. And so they looked into, why there were so many low birth weight babies in this community. And a lot of the assumptions that they had about why this was were not exactly correct. One of the biggest reasons for this was the stress of racism. And I mean, that's astounding that would cause, but it's true, because if you are encountering racism on a daily basis, it's going to impact you. I mean, just think about, how did it feel for the last 2 years as we've gone through this pandemic and the stress that we've been enduring for this? You know that it's going to impact us. We've seen people who have been affected, their physical health has been affected simply from the stress of the pandemic. Imagine, I mean, I cannot even imagine what racism is like, because I don't have to encounter that. However, that stress similarly can cause actual physical things going on inside of the body. And when a person has those physical things that are occurring to them inside a family, and then it can be passed on to children. So this is just one way that generational trauma can be passed on to future generations. And this talks a little bit more about how it fits in with ACEs. And I think that is, can we go to the next slide? Maybe I got ahead of myself again. I did get ahead of myself again. But I actually kind of went all the way to the end because I did want to talk about this because I know that that this is what, well, back one slide to the historical trauma. Can we talk a little bit about how you see cultural competence fitting into the work that you are all doing with ACEs and trauma? Does anybody have any observations on this? Do you think that what I was saying was accurate, or do you think I was off base? Do you think that it has something to do with it? What do you think? Okay.
I think it's a really vicious cycle, and absolutely historical trauma keeps perpetuating and turns into adverse childhood experiences.
Okay. Well, I am sorry that I got a little bit sidetracked on this, and I do want to, can we go back to the slide and talk a little bit about stereotypes? And I wanted to just bring this up because a lot of times sometimes people have kind of a misunderstanding of stereotypes and think that sometimes it's okay to stereotype if it's a good stereotype, like saying that a group of people are really good at whatever it is. That's not, I mean, that's a stereotype. It doesn't really matter if the people that you're talking about have all have some kind of a similar trait that's good. Because what a stereotype does is to take away your personal power. It says that, well, you know, you might be really good at whatever it is, but that's not really because you're really good at it. It's because you're, you know, from a certain religion or a certain ethnicity, which actually has absolutely nothing to do with it. I mean, realistically, that doesn't really have much to do with it. And your culture might teach you more about valuing certain things, but it's not going to make you better at any particular thing. If somebody is really good at something, it's because they work really hard and they're really good at that thing. And I've heard a lot of times where people were like, oh, no, I don't mean to say it that way. I mean, I know my kids used to say that. I'm like, no, we're not going to do that. So it's just something to think about in regards to stereotypes. And then I did see in the slide, one of the comments that came through, and I'm sorry, I couldn't see all of them because they were coming in pretty fast, was about the difference between equity and equality. And I think there was a slide on that. There we go. And this is one slide. There's lots of different ways to show it. But if we give everybody exactly the same thing, we're not necessarily going to help the people who need it the most. And that other slide that we showed with the racetrack, that's similar, shows, where was that one? That one there. That's kind of the same kind of graphic, the difference between equality and equity. Those two people have sort of the same, they both have to get to the same distance in this race, right? But it's not, one of them has a lot of obstacles in the way. So that would be the difference between equality and equity. And I know that sometimes people are like, well, why should some people get more than other people? I want you to think about this in a kind of a different way. Think about this in the way that, I don't know how long ago it was, but remember when they started making sidewalk cuts for people who use wheelchairs? And so words, because it makes my life a whole lot easier. And there's a whole lot of other things that were developed for a particular group of people to make it so that they could do the same kinds of things that other people can do, make it more equitable. But not only did they do that when they created those things, like the sidewalk cuts, but they made life easier for everybody, because that's just the way it works. Like I was talking about before, when we make more opportunities for everyone, and we make it possible for everyone to have similar opportunities, then what we do is we're going to make the whole community safer and more prosperous. And a lot of times, you know, that thing gets in the way of, yeah, but they're getting more than I am. And if we can just look past that and say, not really, they're getting what we already have. And I know this conversation, I've heard a lot of it, you know, and we just kind of need to look at the way that we have, the different opportunities that we have, the different privileges that we have, and to see how can we share them with people who might not have the same opportunities. So I do want to go down to that managing fear one if we have time, because I do want to talk about this as well. And I'm so sorry for making you dizzy with all these slides. So when I was working on my degree in emergency management, we read this one book that really had an impact on me. It was called The Psychology of Terror. And it was a lot about, you know, how people being afraid in a disaster impacts the community. And one of the things that they said that I just thought was, I'd never heard it that way before, was that when people are given death salience, and what that means is like when people are confronted with their own mortality, when we have a pandemic or any other kind of a disaster where people are, you know, kind of forced into thinking about, wow, I guess someday I'm going to die, because we don't go around thinking about that kind of stuff all the time because it's kind of depressing. But different kinds of things go on inside of our head when we start thinking about our own mortality. And one of the things that happens is it divides people into us and them. And so you see this, you can see it in the pandemic, that's for doggone sure. But you saw this after 9/11, where people, you know, became afraid of anybody who didn't look just like they did, and they became the enemy. And one of the stories that I thought was disturbing was Sherman Alexie, who's Native American, I believe, from Eastern Washington. And he was standing on a street corner, and pickup truck full of guys went by and yelled out to him, "Go back where you came from." He's Native American. So what was going on was, I imagine what was going on was inside of the heads of the guys inside of the pickup truck was they were in that kind of fear zone where they had to go between dividing people into the us and the them. And if they didn't look like us, then they must be the them. Right? And that doesn't help any of us. And it makes things worse. Now, if you go back and look at disasters that have occurred, if you look into communities where racism was an issue, or where poverty was an issue, or any of these negative kinds of things were an issue, after the disaster happened, they became even worse. I mean, because it exacerbates it. And you can see it even in this pandemic. You can see that we had divisions in our country before, and now they are even more. There is a silver lining though. In the book, what they talked about is when people have an awareness of culture and understanding that there is more than just my culture, an acceptance of other people for who they are, that we can come together. So I showed you some examples of what happens after the bad thing, but I will also show you an example of what can happen. And it happened right here in Everett. Some of you may remember this. It was after 9/11. I hope some of you will say something if you remember this, but up in North Everett, there's a community of people from Iraq, they're refugees from the first Gulf War. And they've been living there for a while. And after 9/11 happened, a lot of the women, when they were going to the grocery store, would be harassed. Children would be harassed coming home from school, all of these kinds of things. And so there was a group of people in Everett who came together, and I think they called themselves Peaceful Witnesses. And they would walk home with the kids. They would walk with the moms to the grocery store. They would just be with them. And that is the positive thing that we can take out of this, is if we can, learn this now. And even though we're in the middle of a disaster, the pandemic, we can counteract some of this negativity by trying, meeting people where they are, recognizing that we all have different ideas, and trying to be able to look at people, taking off our lenses and seeing people as they are, and hopefully allowing them to see us as what we are wanting to communicate. Does that make sense? And does anybody remember the Peaceful Witness program? Okay, well, it did happen right in Everett. So that's a good thing. Okay, let's see what we've got here. So we can go down to, I think this is the very last slide. But so what can we do from here? I want you to just kind of think about what are the biases that, that we might have, and you can take some of those tests. And then once you know if you have a bias, then it's much easier to work on it. Don't take yourself too seriously. Always be open to learning. That's really one of the most important things that I could suggest. Could we take away the screen share, and then I can hopefully see everybody and maybe take more questions? Wow, there's a lot of people on there. So I hope I didn't talk too fast. What kind of questions do you all have? Or do you have any? Okay. So I should look into the chat because there is a lot of stuff in there. Okay.
I think my name is Patrick. I think this is a good reminder for me personally, coming from a background of coming from a different state to, place of, where I'm working at now, and just to see other people's view of how they see you or how you see them, this is a good reminder for me, and thank you, I can talk about racism and all this stuff because I experienced it a lot, and I am helping people that need help, and they're not even in my own race, so it's just, I meet people halfway, and I want them to meet me halfway. Then maybe we can walk together